Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about Anthem and BioWare and how that all will probably affect the next Mass Effect game. If you like Anthem or BioWare or Mass Effect, please subscribe to this channel. If you like gaming news, speculation, reviews, all of that stuff, please subscribe. If you like this video, please like it. If you have a thought, if you have an opinion, if you have a question, or if you just want to say hello, get that in the comments down below. Today, I want to talk about a tweet thread and subsequent Reddit summary. This topic was suggested by a viewer and Discord contributor, YouTube's. I have a weekly gaming podcast called the EchoCast, and I have a Google form where you can suggest stories and topics and ask questions and give feedback. But every now and then, a question will come through that I don't really want to do in like a in the middle of a podcast. I would rather kind of make a separate video about it. So that's what this is, and what it is addressing is a thing that happened. I believe it was about a week ago. I'm recording this at the beginning of June of 2023, and on May 27th of 23, Ian Saderdalen, I know I'm saying that wrong, and I will apologize viciously, was a BioWare team lead and development lead, I believe, from 2017 to 19. So you may be doing the math in your head and you may be saying, well, that's interesting. What a rough time for BioWare. And it sounds like it was. So after the release of, I think, partially Redfall, but especially Golem, which is a monumentally historically bad game, it sounds like, there has been this kind of game dev trend going on around Twitter where they're posting a screenshot from Metacritic of the worst game that they've worked on from a score perspective, and then kind of giving some takes on it. So what this one was responding to was someone who actually worked on Aliens Colonial Marines, this Alpaca Ash. This is kind of funny in my opinion, because that game, just as a little tidbit, one of the big knocks on it was the terrible AI, I believe, of your own AI and the enemy. And I believe many years later, fairly recently, someone found in the code like one line of code that caused the AI to not work correctly. And while I doubt that would have made it a super good game, it probably would have made it better and not a 43 Metascore. Anyways, let's get to Ian's. And so Ian worked on Anthem and talked a lot. The tweet here reads, I learned a lot on this project. We knew it wasn't ready, as this game was literally created in 15 months, which is unheard of for a game of that scope. Anthem 2 would have been great. So there are a lot of responses to this. As you see, there's 455 retweets, 141 quote tweets, 7,600 likes, and 328 bookmarks. And there are just endless. So I'm not going to go through all of these responses because a lovely individual, the Trash Shiro on Reddit, took this on the slash game subreddit and summarized it, and I read through this and we'll kind of go through it. It's interesting, and the reason I want to talk about this is because this is the last full-scale game that BioWare released, and will be the last one before they release Dreadwolf and then presumably the next Mass Effect. Yes, Mass Effect Legendary Edition is in there. That was a very procedurally remastered game that I'm sure had a lot of hands on it, and there were probably a decent number of devs that worked on that, and it was led up by Mac Walters, who's no longer with BioWare. But I think that even maybe more so than Andromeda, what happened here with Anthem is worth talking about. So this person summarized a bunch of the points, and it was really good. So the first one here is talking about how EA had their reasons to release it early, but were stupid, and the devs team quote had to pay the price. EA learned a lot from this development, but whether they apply it to the future or not is unknown. And that's, kind of what we're all waiting to see. And I think there's a trap with Dreadwolf. I think Dreadwolf is this game that began development in a old EA and an old BioWare, that has changed a lot, both of them, for better or worse, depending on how you look at it. And it's a game that I bet when it comes out is going to have a lot of good stuff. Dreadwolf is what I'm talking about, but will kind of feel like it was stuck between two versions of the publisher and the dev it's coming from. And so I'm just kind of curious to see how that works out. But yeah, the whole statement from, and these are all summaries of what this Ian person had responded in this gigantic Twitter thread. Another one here where I guess they basically acknowledge that Jason Schreier's article from that when he was still with Kotaku was basically 100% true, and everything that was in it was true in some capacity, and that there was a lot more, and we come back to that. And so this one is really interesting to read. How did they manage to ship it in 15 months? The dev team mentions working about 90 hours a week for 15 months. Many other devs on the team were also doing so, and they think that others were doing 90 hours a week prior to the 15-month mark. And so it goes into a bunch of quotes, and I suggest, I'll try to remember to put this the link to this summary down in the comment in the description. But I mean, this guy talks about how like he lost his marriage over this, had to go to therapy over it, and while he feels like he's doing better now, he still has like scars, like mentally from this time. Now, to be fair, divorces don't happen in a vacuum. Things like that. These big life events. Who knows the context and things like that. But as someone, and I'll scroll down here. So this top comment to this was 90 hours a week. That's crazy. And this person did break it down. They said that essentially breaks down to 16 hours a day for 5 days a week, and then 5 hours a day on the weekends. I mean, that's like unhealthy, like physically for humans to work that much, even in physically low labor, but still mentally stressful jobs. Like, that's crazy. And when they talk about these lessons that were learned, I certainly, from the bottom of my heart, hope that this is one of them. And here's the simple thing, is a game shouldn't get developed in 15 months. I would be amazed if a lot of indie games are developed in 15 months, let alone an attempting to be AAA gigantic game like Anthem tried to be and was in a lot of ways. That's crazy. What's most notable here, and we can track back to this at the end of the video, but they were quoted as saying, "I guarantee we could have put something out in Unreal. Working in Frostbite was rough." I think that's really interesting. And then they comment here that people gave them death threats because of the drop rates. If you don't remember, Anthem was a Destiny, the Division style looter game in a lot of ways, and it had like drops and stuff like that, and people get weird about that. But that statement about Unreal, I want to come back to at the end of the video. So he talks about it being delayed because it was missing features, lack of polish, and that had bugs that needed to be fixed. The scope creep is a big one, and I've talked about this with the next Mass Effect game and even the Dreadwolf game that's coming. Saying that we were always trying to push for cool features because there was a lot of high expectations for the game, but they feel like they could have done more if they pulled back their scope creep. So if you ever hear a developer talk about scope creep, it's where they just can't stop adding new stuff to what they're doing. So the whole idea is that if you make a game that I'd say like a game like Diablo 4, which just came out, is a game that it seems like they kept the scope in check. They didn't keep adding things that they wanted to do. And in some ways, Diablo 4 is getting a little bit of flack for not innovating in its genre. But instead, it seems like what the team tried to do was everything they've learned from the first 3 Diablo games, looking at what games like Path of Exile and stuff like that have done, and they picked the set of things they wanted to do, and they just did them really well. And they may not be super innovative, but they're done extremely well. And when you see this statement about Anthem, it seems like no one was there to do that. No one said, hey, we need to pull this back, maybe make a smaller game that we can do really well in 15 months, rather than a gigantic game that we can't finish. And you may see some parallels with that, I think, in Andromeda. The next one here is the main team was focused on getting the game out in a functional state. We needed another 1 or 2 studios to make end-game content. If you remember with Anthem, the complete lack of end-game at all was a big rip on the game, and then like DLCs and stuff like that just never came. And he's basically saying that like BioWare just wasn't big enough. And I believe they were also, I assume, beginning development on Dreadwolf at this time, and were finishing up Andromeda when he started, and dealing with the fallout from Andromeda if he started in 2017. After the launch, they did everything they could to stabilize the game. Content features got deprioritized. And it was this, this acknowledgement here from him of saying like, we knew there was no end game, we knew there was no replayability, and that they had this is an interesting one. Management was putting in gating mechanics to lengthen the time it took to finish the story. If I remember correctly, it was removed from the final version from Backlash. I don't think it was. I specifically remember when Anthem came out, there was one mission. It was like in the middle of the story, or your progression through the story, where you had to collect, it was like some large number of these like orbs or something, and bring them back to a location to continue the story. And the way it was set up is it added like 5 or 10 hours to the game of just grinding this one thing. Now, please correct me in the comments if I'm misremembering that, but I actually don't think that was removed as he seems to think it was. I don't think it was. I'm fairly certain it's still, even to this day, is still in there. He talks about how it was a great team effort to get the controls, how we shipped. They went through a lot of iterations. It was super tough from the beginning. We knew the team, the controls, they were happy with them, and it took a lot of feedback from the Game Changers, which is interesting. That's like a fan group that gets to play games early and give feedback directly to the devs. And then a user asked, when you say it wasn't ready, was that always communicated with other members of the team, i.e. the publishers? And Ian responded, I think it was ignored, denied from leadership. There's a story there, but I will refrain. And this next part talks about how it's assumed that many of the devs are still under NDA for Anthem, and that once that NDA is up, NDAs, in my experience, are tend to be about 5 years. So if this game came out in 2000, I think it was 18 or 19, we still have another couple years for those NDAs to run out. I would be surprised if we don't have a gigantic Jason Schreier article here in a couple of years where they spill the beans on a lot of the stuff that happened with Anthem, and how, he talks about in here how developing multiple projects, which I believe he was probably referencing Andromeda and Anthem, and then Dreadwolf and Anthem. It just didn't work. The BioWare magic is just kind of a myth, which even like I think Mark Dara has talked about as well. And then their statement here at the end says, basically that while some of the leadership of BioWare has left, that caused these issues, which wouldn't surprise me if maybe some of that's talking about Casey Hudson, that some are still there. So, we can only speculate who that's about, who he's speaking to. And then the final thing is he talked a bit in that thread about Anthem 2.0 or Anthem Next. If you don't remember, before they ended development of Anthem, there was a good, I want to say 6 months or maybe more, where everyone was under the impression they were going to do a big, they went silent, and they were doing a bunch of stuff. And then from what I remember, it was thought that there was I remember a story about how, okay, there's a big, I can't remember if it was like a shareholders call or something was going on where the fate of Anthem was going to be decided, and they decided to shut it down. So I've seen multiple Anthem devs say that they really thought that this Anthem 2.0 or Anthem Next, it wasn't necessarily a sequel to Anthem. It was just going to be almost like a re-release or a reboot of the game. It sounded like they were really genuinely excited about it. So I'll try to remember to put this down in the description. I think it's worth a read. I'll try to remember to put this thread so you can actually read his statements specifically. But a few of the things I think are really interesting is I really hope, and it seems like from the devs I follow and stuff, this whole thing of this 90 hours a week for a year and a half or more for some people doesn't seem like it's a thing anymore. I have a feeling this is a part of the culture that has actually changed a lot, which may be why we aren't getting games, not only in not 15 months, but in many, many more years than that. That's fine. One interesting thing that was in here I didn't mention is that at least Ian, in their opinion, didn't really blame EA for the issues with this game. And often when you see, these EA published games go bad, you see all of this like complaints about EA and how they are the reason this happened. And this person, at least themselves, doesn't believe that EA was really at fault. And it sounded like they blamed much of the leadership of BioWare more so. They did make a statement here as well, that they believe that if Anthem had been canceled, that BioWare would have been liquidated and shut down itself, which is kind of crazy. This person wasn't like an exec at BioWare, so you have to take some of these statements for what they are. But I really find this line here of this: I guarantee we could have put something out in Unreal. Working on Frostbite was rough, to be really interesting. We are under the impression that Dreadwolf is still on Frostbite. After seeing the results of Frostbite on like the newer Battlefield games from a graphical perspective, and even like the Dead Space remake they did recently that was on Frostbite, I imagine that since 2019, 18, 17, they have like figured out how to use that engine better and have made the tools in Frostbite easier to use. But this statement here that they think that they could have put out at least a better product, maybe not exactly what they wanted, in Unreal instead, makes the potential for the next Mass Effect game being on Unreal Engine 5 interesting, maybe exciting, even because we've talked a lot about when can the next Mass Effect come out, and as the Dreadwolf game kind of gets pushed down further down the line and stuff like that, how is it going to be 26, 27, 28, 2028 before we get this next Mass Effect game? Well, who knows? It's all kind of hard to tell, especially when we're not getting info directly from people who know. But I thought this was worth taking a look at. YouTube's who submitted this actually for the podcast. I appreciate them for that. I think this was an interesting video to talk about, because I really, it shows you this was the last big BioWare release, and doing a little bit of a post-mortem on that helps you kind of keep expectations for the future in check. I would say that maybe Dreadwolf will have a reduced scope to maybe make it easier to develop. It kind of doesn't seem like that's going to be the case, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if the next Mass Effect is a smaller scoped game and maybe isn't the super gigantic galaxy hopping game that maybe people may be expecting a little bit, simply because they probably don't want to take 10 years to develop it. If they want to get the next Mass Effect game out by 2025 or 2026, it will probably have to be a smaller game, which, especially if it's meant to be a new trilogy or a new series of games, is fine. Because if they can put out a really high quality, smaller scoped game every 3 years, rather than a really big, maybe unfinished game every 7 years, I suspect much of the gaming community would be fine with that. I think we're seeing a renaissance of single player games right now, and I think that scope and that scope creep is probably something that we're gonna see talked about with Dreadwolf once it comes out, because as they changed what kind of game that was gonna be and stuff like that, but they've had to deal with that quite a bit. Maybe that's why someone like Mark Dara is being brought back, where people from the Mass Effect team are being brought over to work on it. Maybe the scope was too large, but we'll have to wait and see. So there it is. That's this video. If you like the video, if you want more information or more videos about Mass Effect or gaming in general, or BioWare or Dreadwolf as we learn more, please subscribe to the channel. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, hit the like button. It helps the video get pushed out to more people. If you have any of your own thoughts or questions or ideas for other videos, or just to say hello, comment that down below. You can catch me all over the internet as Bond Diesel on Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, and obviously here on YouTube. I do have a weekly gaming podcast where I talk about gaming news and speculation, and I even do some reviews. It's called the Echo Cast, and it's on all podcast platforms and this very YouTube channel. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.